Are they still a That's oh yeah, you got circles right there. Good evening. We're going to go ahead and jump in and make a start. Every week we have some people who were with us before and weren't. And as one of my older friends said, and also slept since last week. So we're going to do a couple of reviews that will tie into what we did before. A part of why we did this chart is that the majority, I would say, of Christians have no idea of the chronology of when things happen through the Old Testament. And a part of the reason for that is that the scripture is given to us in sections. And like, for example, when I read the first 5 books, I had an answer to Tim's devotional tonight. I am trying to follow the last verse in 1 John. And if you just want to look at that sometime, that's my response to the devotional tonight. Not to him, but just for me. My little children, keep yourselves some idols. I don't get stressed over something that I don't participate in. And I know we need to, and I know you need to do it for a job, and I know I'm an older generation, but one of the joys of being in Australia for a month is that I'm going to look at my phone every 3 or 4 days. If you need me, I'm halfway around the world. Kent took a college group on a campaign in Australia to a place that did not have any internet for 2 weeks. He said we were going through serious withdrawal symptoms. They talked about it before, but we can just get so accustomed to something and having something in our hand and everything else. But that was his term. He said we were going through serious withdrawal symptoms because we hadn't got to check our mail or talk with anybody or check with our friends for 2 weeks. And anyway, I'll leave that where that's at. I want us to start, first of all, on the side that has the dark side. The other side has the cross on it. And just very briefly, and I'm talking about the sections for a second. When I read those first 5 books, the word identity comes to mind. They have been slaves. They've been in Egypt 4 centuries. They've been captives as such. And do we have there's an outline somewhere up here on the side. Just grab that. And God wants to give them a new identity. And this runs all the rest of the way through Scripture, even to today. And the new identity is love God, heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbors yourself. Our books of history, which take us then all the way through till the end of the Old Testament, which will be our end here, are those 12 books. I like the word conclusions. There arose a generation that knew not the Lord. And every time I read that in Judges, I just go, dun, 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 dun. Oh, he was like his father David. And you're going to go, okay, this is going to be okay. He was not like his father David. And so from Joshua through Ezra and Nehemiah, then the books of history gives us conclusions about how God's people kept their identity. When we come to those beautiful books of poetry, the books of poetry commend in poetical form what the law commands. Happy is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, or stands in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of scoffers. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night, and he will be like a tree. And all through poetry, we will hear commendation for what God has commanded in their identity. And then when we come to our prophets, which we are tonight, I spell F-O-R-T-H, and Ezekiel is going to be involved in this. All of them are. Thus saith the Lord. They're going to speak to the people of their generation, and I literally do this. They're the mouthpiece of God. I'm sorry, I still just laugh. I can't imagine being Ezekiel and God says, you will be mute. You will not be able to talk until I come to you. And I'm saying, God, I'm a prophet. You want me to be a spokesman. And when you read through Ezekiel, there's just several times that God goes, The visual aid goes on, the laying on his side, cutting his hair, all this other keeps happening. But you just imagine being a prophet and can't talk. But that was, oh, the word of the Lord came to me, and then he speaks forth. That's F-O-R-T-H. And through inspiration, so in other words, they're speaking forth to the people of their day, F-O-R-E. They will start foretelling the things that are going to come in the future. And so when you look at that, that's how God put our scriptures together, but it's not in chronological order. And because it's in types of material, then most people have no really idea how the thread unfolds. So quick review, Abraham is about, and we have a C, Abraham is about 2,000. So he's before the cross as we are after. Mount Sinai, ballpark of 1,500. Some will put it a little bit later, but roughly 500 years later. The United Kingdom comes along. Saul, David is 1,000, and we're within a year after that. And then that first line that goes up, the kingdom divides. And again, Jeroboam should have been in Jerusalem, but he didn't. He went into the northern kingdom, built the 2 golden calves, and they just stayed in idolatry for the next 190 years. There are 19 kings and 6 different dynasties on that little top line. And then we're going to see in a second, they are captured by the Assyrians, and that's how the Samaritans come about. A few of them remain. Then Judah alone, the 2 tribes, continues on. And the little part that goes here, the first group are taken into captivity in 606. That's when Daniel goes as a young man. The second group are going to go into captivity 598, 597. Ezekiel is in that group. And so while Daniel's in the royal court, Ezekiel is the prophet among the people. And then the city is actually destroyed the third time, 587 to 586. The Babylonian Empire is going to fall, and we'll see this in a second. And then within 3 years, they're sent back. And that's a part of God's fulfillment of the things that are there. The one thing we want to add, and there's several others, but Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah, coming toward the end, there's 2 different dates. One is 458, but easy to remember, 444. And I typically put Malachi at about 400. And so each week, we'll get something that adds a little bit more detail, a little bit more things that take place. But I love having the visual to be able to see across. Now, if you turn the page over to the side that has the red cross on it, everything's the same except I want us to see the interaction with the kingdoms, the major kingdoms that takes place in the Old Testament. And again, I never try to insult your intelligence, but I do this for my 5-year-olds, and we just always did memory hooks. The kingdoms are in alphabetical order. Assyrians are going to come first. They're going to fall to the Babylonians. Whether you want to call them the Medes or the Persians, they're next. And your older translations will say Chaldeans. So B and C is together. And then after 200 years, the Persians are going to fall to Alexander. You're going to have the Greeks, Hellenism is going to come in. And then we're going to have the Romans come in from there. But those early kingdoms are in alphabetical order. The Assyrian kingdom is oftentimes called, just in ancient history, Neo, meaning the new. There was an older Assyrian kingdom. It came and went. For 300 years, they were ruthless. They would capture a town and start piles of hands and feet and heads. They would sharpen poles and drop people over inside their sternum, and you can't lift yourself up, and you would just eventually lose body fluid and everything else, but you just imagine the pain of it all. Just absolutely ruthless people. And we know Nineveh, first of all, from Jonah. And then again, a sound alike. Then a few years later, God has the prophet Nahum write to Nineveh about her coming destruction. And there's going to be a major battle in 612, and the battle of Carchemish. Pharaoh Necho came up from Egypt. Josiah went out to stop him and got killed. He was their last good king. And the Babylonians defeat the Egyptians and the Assyrians, and by 605, they have exterminated them. You cannot find an Assyrian. When the ancient world finally turned on them, they just exterminated them. At one point, when they capture the northern kingdom, they go ahead and go into Jerusalem, and they march 500 miles into Egypt just to kill people. Egypt had already said, okay, country expression, Kephro, if you're wrestling, you want to give up, you say Kephro, you know. Egypt had already surrendered, and they says, yeah, fine. Can you imagine marching from here to Memphis in the desert just to kill a few more people? That was just the nature of the Assyrian Empire. Then, so when they fall, the Babylonians come, 612, and it's primarily the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. And once he dies, there's a gradual decline. And the early years of Daniel are going to be in the Babylonian Empire. Now, something real quick on Daniel, again, just for context. Daniel is, and let me just put on this side. On the other side, if you notice, it's in the really dark print, Daniel 9 and 2, Daniel is reading Jeremiah, and in Jeremiah, and this is in chapter 25 and 29, Daniel reads, God says the captivity is going to take place 70 years. Well, he doesn't have to go to the history books because he was a part of that initial captivity. So watch real closely. When he is thrown into the lion's den, it's not under the Babylonians, it's under the Medes and the Persians. So add 70 years. How old is he when he heads out? Let's say 15. We don't know. But let's just say 15. If 70 years have gone by, how old is he when he's thrown in the lion's den? 85. But because he read the prophecies, foretelling that the captivity was going to last 70 years, then he knows when it's going to take place. They're having the drunken festival. And remember, the handwriting comes up on the wall, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And that night, the Babylonian Empire falls. He is rising in the Persian Empire when he's thrown into the lion's den. And I mentioned this when we did this in the auditorium. In my flannel graph growing up in the Sayre Church, Daniel was a young man. I mean, that was our visual, and I always kind of thought that. But then when I got to looking at the time frame, then he's in the lion's den after the 70 years. So then you add how old was he when they took him off. And so it's safe to say he is an old man. And that's part of what I love about these guys, Daniel, Ezekiel. They're carried away. They live their whole lives in captivity, and they never get to go home. But they're faithful to God through the whole thing. So the Babylonian Empire is going to fall in 539. And the Assyrians and the Babylonians had both had a deportation policy. If we capture you, we kill a whole bunch of you, but we send a few of you off to somewhere else. And the Medes and the Persians said, send them home. And so the Babylonians are going to fall in 539. And within 3 years, and this is prophesied again in Isaiah, and you'll see this at the end of Isaiah 44 and 45, God calls Cyrus, 150 years before he becomes Cyrus the Great, my shepherd. And Cyrus says, go home. So the night the handwriting is on the wall, the Babylonian Empire falls, and within 3 years, the Medes and the Persians say, go home. And we did this last week. You subtract 536 from 606, and guess what you get? 70 years. God causes the rise and the falls of earthly kingdoms in order to bring about his will as given by the prophets. The other thing, we did this real quickly, the temple's destroyed in 586. Haggai and Zechariah start building on the temple in 520. It takes them 5 years basically to get it done. The second temple is then finally dedicated in 516. Same type thing. Subtract 516 from 586, and it's going to be 70 years separate from the city that it's going to be before the temple is going to be established. And so our Medes and the Persians will take us all the way through the end of the Old Testament. Alexander comes and in a decade spreads Greek language, Greek culture, and that's why our New Testament is written in Greek. That's a whole story. And then the Romans come into Palestine in 63 as a peacekeeping force. You Jews are just fighting each other and you're just having trouble getting along, so we'll just come in and just kind of keep the, and they never left. And that's when the Romans come in, and we're going to find them through the rest of that. If the guys can help us, we're going to turn the page because I just wanted to do that historically. We're going to be in Ezekiel 34. This is going to be a section where God speaks against shepherds. And this is what I love doing classes like this, because you always fill in something that you hadn't. I had primarily just thought of like local leaders or whatever, but especially in the ancient Near East, oftentimes the rulers were referred to as shepherds. And it very much may be that the focus of God's judgment and complaint against the shepherds may actually be against the kings. And we're going to notice that here in just a second. I put the word woe against the shepherds of Israel. We always have 15 words or less, the central idea. God pronounces judgment upon his shepherds for their abuse of the flock. And what I want us to do tonight, our aim, I want us to reframe the negative. God's going to say, you did this, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done this. And if you either take out the not or you change it, there's also a sense that God gives a really good definition, a really good description of what a shepherd should be. See what we're going to do? We're going to take all the negatives. By the time we get through, you shouldn't have done this, why did you do that? And we're going to say, do the opposite. And that's what God was actually wanting the shepherds to do. But before we do, just notice, and I'm thinking of shepherds, shepherding. Why did Abraham and Lot part company? Their herds and their flocks were too large. So the man of promise is going to be, along with the livestock, a shepherd. Genesis 26:14, Isaac had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, like father, like son. These are always so interesting. How did Jacob meet Rachel? As soon as Jacob saw Rachel, he came near the well. The girls were watering the flock, and the guys were pushing them off, and he watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And then over time, and Jacob means like supplanter. My dad would call him horse trader. Brother McCord called him heel grabber. And why did his father-in-law become envious of Jacob? Well, Genesis 30, starting in 42, the feebler sheep and animals were being Laban's, the stronger were Jacob's. The man increased greatly. He had large flocks, and then the list goes on and on. Our services with the kids on Wednesday night, the patriarchs who lived in tents, are all shepherds. Look at Joseph. What was he doing when he was sold in slavery? He was 17. He was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He's at home. Oh, go see how it is with your brothers and with the flock and bring me word. And all those details take place toward the end of the book of Genesis. What do they tell Pharaoh? Oh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds. And what is your occupation? Pharaoh says, oh, your servants are shepherds as our fathers were. How did Moses meet his wife? He's in Midian, same type thing. The guys had pushed the girls away, watering the flocks and stuff. And the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. They tell Dad, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and drew water for us and watered the flock. And Dad says, why did you let him get away? Where is he? At David Roper's funeral on Monday, 3 people from Newcastle had come up, and David had always wanted to preach another sermon in his 90s, and he was in bed. They thought they were going to give a devotional, but David said, oh, while you're here, just pull up a chair. I have a sermon I'd like to give so I can check off my bucket list that I preached when I was 90. Daryl, I asked, was that family there? So the gentleman and his daughter, the wife was sick. They stood up. And what did he say, Daryl?
He's trying to introduce his daughter to someone.
Does anybody know any good-looking boys? I've got a 17-year-old daughter that needs a boyfriend. We had friends in Australia saying, why were people laughing? So my brother says, how old is she, you know? And so here we are in the middle of this funeral, and this guy's kind of saying, well, you know, have a look at her. Anybody know any good-looking boys? Well, the priest says, girls, why'd you let him get away? Go find him, go bring him here. And that's how Moses becomes a part of their family. Exodus 3:1, Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. We're about to have the burning bush. And then David, 6 boys, not this one, not this one. Is there one more? Well, there's a runt. He's out. He's just out taking care of the sheep. You bring him in. Do you see the thread? All of the major spiritual characters in the early part of the Old Testament are all shepherds. And God is going to draw on things they've learned physically and taking care of and minding those things to help them and be a part of their spiritual inheritance. David tells King Saul, 1 Samuel 17, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And then here's some things from Psalms. And again, notice the bridge, the shepherding. God chose David, his servant, Psalm 78:70. He took him from the sheepfolds, and he brought him to shepherd Jacob, his people, his inheritance. And this is my favorite verse about the kingship of David. With an upright heart, he shepherded them and guided them with a skillful hand. And yes, he made some terrible mistakes, but the experience that he had gained physically as a shepherd, God is going to allow him to use that skill in the spiritual shepherding and looking after the people. Samples, Psalm 79:13, we your people, the sheep of your pasture. Psalm 80, verse 1, give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. Psalm 68, your flock found a dwelling there. And the most familiar passage probably in the Old Testament, the Lord is my shepherd. And we're going to hear an echo and a reality tonight. Jesus is going to say, I am the good shepherd, in contrast to the shepherds we're going to look at tonight. So we're going to read some things leading into, and then we'll read parts of the chapter. But just notice this for context. Ezekiel is ministering to a people who are broken, battered in every conceivable way. And notice this, these are exiles. They're the bare remnant that has survived. They're living in a foreign country. So there's political, economic, agricultural, social, judicial, religious, personal, relational, and spiritual dimensions to their sin and their suffering. And God intends to tackle every aspect of that. But the grace of God reaches parts that the human solution can't do. Last week we looked at different ways that visual aids, remember we talked about shaving his hair and his beard, laying on his side. I still just shudder when I read this. Tonight your wife is going to die, and tomorrow you will go about as nothing has happened, and it just quietly says, that evening my wife died, and on the morrow I did as I was commanded. Because of time, I didn't get to this, but he's also the watchman. And this is used in some other contexts, but what is the job of the watchman on the wall? If you see something, you warn the people. You're not responsible if they actually listen or not, but your job as the watchman is that when you see something, you warn the people. And so God refers to Ezekiel as a watchman, and this is another part of the things that God had asked him to do. Here's what's significant in terms of message and application. The first part of the book, foretelling, Jerusalem's going to fall. And even in Jerusalem, they're saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. The people will not believe him. They will not listen to him. But notice this, and we're in Ezekiel 33:21. The 12th year of our exile, in the 10th month, the 5th day, notice how specific, a fugitive from Jerusalem came to me. And if you're here earlier, it's roughly a 900-mile journey. As the crow flies, it would be shorter. I think it's closer to 40 to nearly 500 miles, but it's desert. So you have to go all the way up to Syria, come down. It's called the Fertile Crescent. But if you're a fugitive, you don't have military escort. If you're a fugitive, you're in danger because you don't have any official permission to be where you are. So I'm sure there's times that he either would have to kind of pull off the road or do things. My grandfather's grandfather was captured by the Indians when he was 12, lived through his teenage years, and he rode the Pony Express. And my grandfather asked him, how did you survive? And he said, well, the horses can smell the Indians before I can see them. And he, like I said, he'd lived with the Indians for an extended period of time. And he said if one station was burnt out, it was another 10 miles to the next fresh horse. But every time my horse smelt them, we pulled over into a thicket. I held his muzzle, his nose, so he didn't make any sounds. And he survived riding the Pony Express. But like this fugitive, you don't just take off and it's a straight dash. You have to kind of be careful and watch what you're doing. And so we don't know how long, but this wasn't a direct flight. Being a fugitive, it's going to take him a while to get there. But notice, what is the message? The city has been struck down. And he had opened my mouth by the time the man had came to me in the morning, so my mouth was opened, and I was no longer mute, and the word of the Lord came to me. So there it is. There's another one of those situations. God has closed his mouth, and they've been waiting and waiting, and finally they get a live messenger that comes through and just says, everything that you've been saying that God's been telling you as a prophet has happened. And so for the people, this is just going to be disheartening. I mean, I don't even know, I don't have strong enough words. You just think, how just takes all the air out of you that, oh, the whole city's been destroyed. The temple's been destroyed. And so the people who earlier now are in captivity are just now hearing the news. And so what is going to take place is that the early part of the book is primarily this warning and this message. And remember, hard foreheads, hearts of stone, they're not going to listen. From this point on, then Ezekiel is going to try to encourage the exiles that are there to say, yes, but you are the remnant. God is going to take care of you. God will look after you if you'll stay faithful. And so we're going to have a change of message. The first one was the city's going to fall. Now everybody knows. And the people are just so downcast because of that. And we're going to have messages now to try to encourage the people because of their just enormous sense of discouragement for the things that are going on there. This is number 3. In spite of his people's faithlessness, God continued to keep his side of the covenant he had made on Mount Sinai. And so just think about this. Here's our covenant all the way back with Mount Sinai, the 1500s, and we're down well over 1,000 years later. The majority of the time, God's people have been faithless. And God has been faithful. Remember when we did the acronym for Isaiah? Isaiah is going to be 740 to 700. Whoops, that's Israel, but Isaiah's here. And the northern tribes are taken away. Hosea, Micah, Amos, Haimal are going to be involved in that. God comes to Hosea and says, you go marry Gomer, a lady of the street, and have children by her. Okay, I'm sure this didn't apply in their days. My first thought was, can we do a blood test? Pardon? Yes, I want you to go, take a little woman off the street. That's her profession. We're going to have children by her, and all of them have prophetic names. And then what happens? At a point in time, she deserts him and goes back to the street. And you think, here you are left with 3 kids, no wife, and what does God say? You go back and find her, you buy her out of the mess, the situation she's in, and you treat her like nothing has happened. your marriage and lack of her faithfulness is a visual aid for how my people have been to me. So God remains faithful to his side of the covenant in spite of just the continued faithlessness of the people. We've used the word theocracy. God is theos. It is a God rule. It's not a monarchy where the king's in charge. God is the king. And the prince or the ruler is to lead the people spiritually. And the elders are going to be a part of this. And again, one of those things you'll just shake your head. We'll look later. God, the vision is it's like he picks him up from the hair in Babylon and he brings him to the temple in Jerusalem. And in the temple, elders are burning incense to like Baal and the other gods. They have all these kind of images along the walls inside the temple. And then there's other people who are worshiping the sun. And God kind of picks him up and gives him a vision and says, here's what the leaders and the spiritual leaders in Jerusalem are doing before the city falls. And so whether you're looking at the kings, whether you're looking at the elders, the leaders, all of them are failing in their calling. I just did two things side by side, and this to me is always helpful. Look at the three groups of people that God is bringing to the people in Jerusalem. This is the one in Jeremiah 18. The law will not perish from the priest. And if you carefully, and yes, we think of the priest with sacrifices, but the priest were the teaching voice of God in the Old Testament, especially before the prophets come along. And the law will not depart from the priest, nor counsel from the wise, and that would be people who are leaders, nor the word from the prophet. And the whole thing, they're not going to listen to Jeremiah. Look at Ezekiel chapter 7. They seek a vision from the prophet. The law perishes from the priest, and counsel from the elders. So, contemporaries, here's a quick reading from Jeremiah. We're in Jerusalem, but remember the exiles were there earlier, and either through this first group or this second group, they are in captivity. And then here's a comment about the people who still remain in Jerusalem. Jeremiah 23, woe to the shepherds, they destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture. He says, you have scattered my flock, you have driven them away, you have not attended to them. I will attend you for your evil deeds. I will gather the remnant of my flock. I will bring them back. Verse 4, I will set shepherds over them who will care for them. They will fear no more. Verse 5, the days are coming when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. So, we're not going to read word for word, but we're just going to highlight some things in chapter 34 and leave you to go back and read this, because the spiritual leaders, and whether you're thinking of the kings or the local men, whether they're elders or leaders, either way, notice what God says. The first thing, there's judgment. And if you look at it in terms of the kings, God is going to remove the corrupt monarchy. Tim gave a lesson, again, back with Isaiah, and it was Uzzah, Manasseh, Ahaz, and then Hezekiah. And then Hezekiah's son is going to be Manasseh, and then it's Amnon, Josiah, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah are going to bring us to the end. And for that 100 years before the fall of Jerusalem, Hezekiah and Josiah had a short reign, are the only kings who are really mainly good all the time. And if you want to do a graph or something else, the majority of the time in that 100 years, the majority of them are not. And we'll look at one of those in a second. So there's going to be 61 kings in all. So from the time Saul becomes king here in the United Kingdom, Saul, David, and Solomon, and then you have the split. We're going to have 19 kings here. Judah is going to have 20 kings, and when you add it up, approximately 61 kings. 3 of them are primarily spoken of as good: David, Hezekiah, and Josiah. Some of the others are mostly good, but there's 3 out of that group. Here's a sample again: Manasseh, 2 Kings 21. He was involved in idolatry, and there's a list this long of all the stuff he was doing. He offered his son as a burnt offering. And I can't go there. I mean, mentally, I just can't go there. I can't imagine being so afraid or having such fear, or it's whatever it is, devotion. I mean, if you've had kids, we've all been upset with our kids, but none of us would think of offering our kids as a sacrifice. We just, and the depth of depravity is just nearly beyond description. Manasseh shed, this is 21:16 of 2 Kings, he shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from one end to the other. And it's virtually like the streets of the city are running with the blood of innocent people in the city of God. And like I said, Ahaz has nailed the doors of the temple shut, the grandfather before him. The sin that he made Judah sin so that they did evil, and this is 24, starting with 3. God removed them out of his sight, the sins of Manasseh. And so for the innocent blood that he had shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not pardon. Okay, I'm not a pessimist by nature. Does anyone know how many babies we've aborted in the United States so far? In my mind, we're over 60 million. At some point, God doesn't tolerate that. And again, we're going to be faithful. And if you've been in a class of the Old Testament with our kids growing up, and you'll figure this out in a second, my wife would say, let's be one of the 10. What do you think? Let's be one of the 10. Oh, we start with 50, we go down to 45, 40, 30, 20. If we can find 10 righteous people, we'll stop. We've got hopefully Lot and his wife and 2 girls. So we're basically, if we can find 6 people in this city, I will spare the city. And one of the things as our kids were involved in school and activity, let your light shine, and let's be one of the 10. Regardless of what's going around us, let's be one of those people who are righteous. But Jerusalem is going to be destroyed later, primarily because that there was so much innocent blood shed during the reign of Manasseh that God says, enough. The people are going to be destroyed because of that. So the key words in this first 10 verses, my sheep, I'm against the shepherds, I will remove them. And the monarchy, the kingship, yes, here's Saul, but again, David is the highlight. But when you look at all the stuff that's happening, by the time you're in the book of Judges, you have this mayhem and murder and killing, the cycle of sinfulness going on before the king. And guess what? By the time we come to the end of the monarch, the rulers, we're back to the same rebellion and the sinfulness that had been a part of it. And at a point in time, God says, that's it. I'm not going to do that anymore. In the middle of that quotation, far from feeding and caring for the flock, the shepherds, possibly the kings, had become wolves. The sheep needed rescuing from the shepherds, and God says, I'm going to step in. So number 2, God's going to restore a theocracy, a rule. And key words, there's going to be an ingathering. The people are scattered. You haven't taken care of them. I'm going to tend them and feed them. Justice is going to be there. And then here's something that's very significant. God is saying, and again, where are we at? We're down here in this period of time. God is saying, I'm going to restore the Davidic, the rule from David again. Hint, it's going to be Jesus. You can see why, not just the disciples, but God's people, and we're going to see a couple of these, are going to be reading this and saying, okay, how long? God made the promise. There's going to be a ruler from the seed of David come along, and they're all expecting right hand and left hand and earthly rule, but they have been expecting this for 600 years. I'm empathetic with their misunderstanding because they've been waiting and waiting all that time. 2 Samuel 7, verses 12 on, your house will be made sure, your throne will be established. Psalm 89, 3 and 4, I will build your throne to all generations. And here's the question, 89, 49, where's your steadfast love? you keep making these promises, and it's going to be 600 years before it's fulfilled. Okay, let's turn the page. And this is one of those ironies, one of those things that just is right, but it doesn't quite fit. It's going to be blind people who are going to be shouting, "Son of David, have mercy on us." The Pharisees can't even conceive that he is the Son of David. He may be a son. But again, quick review. The first person we meet in the New Testament, this is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham, the root of David, the bright and morning star in Revelation. The first and the last person we meet in the New Testament is David, and God's going to fulfill the promises that he made. So, the judgment, they will know I'm the Lord, and now the comfort's going to be coming in some later passages, and you'll hear these things about the shepherd. Remember, Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. The sheep know me. I know them. They will follow me. Even in Revelation 7, one of my favorite verses to use at a funeral, it's the Psalm 23 of the book of Revelation. The shepherd will guide them to streams of living water, and God will wipe away all tears from their eyes. So Jesus, being the Lamb of God, who will take away the sins of the world all the way through the end, that shepherd, and you'll hear the echoes of things spoken by Ezekiel. So God's perspective, leadership carries obligations. And so this will go quickly, but leave you to read this. Shepherds, in our context, we think primarily of elders, okay? That's shepherds, elders, bishops. But there are all kinds of opportunities that we as members of the church have to shepherd and look after one another. Daryl, what chance do 7 guys have of looking after a church of 600 people? And these guys do a great job. I mean, every time they get together, they pray for you. Doesn't matter what the business is. They have 2 families they call. These guys are wonderful shepherds. But just think about it. 7 guys and their wives, if they didn't even have jobs, if they just had nothing else to do, there's no way that 7 guys can look after 600 people. So who are to be shepherds? You and I. And there's opportunities for us to do this. So if you go through chapter 34, and here were the negatives, and you turn them into positives, here's one sample, 34:4. The word not is there, but I'm going to leave not out. The weak you have strengthened, the sick you have healed, you have bound up the strayed, you have brought back those who are lost, you have sought them with kindness. And I'd encourage you, you read the chapter and reverse the charges against the people, and that's what God expects shepherds to be. And very much you and I can help reach out, and this is one of my favorite expressions, King James, we are to laugh with those who laugh, and we are to weep with those who weep. And there's wonderful opportunities to do that. So 2:1, the shepherds look after our souls. This is particularly our elders. God is the ideal shepherd. He loves, he nurtures, he feeds, he seeks. And then Jesus is the good shepherd. Now, these are some things, application in Denny Petrello's commentary on Ezekiel. Shepherds strengthen the spiritually sick. They bind up and encourage the broken and discouraged. They seek those who've left the body to try to lead them back. And they try to seek the lost. So traits of a true shepherd, and this was from Eddie Clower, and I thought this was a nice way to close our thoughts. And again, I encourage you to read 34, reverse it, and then just see what is God saying to you about shepherding opportunities in our lives. A true shepherd, he puts his flock before himself. No greater love has a man than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I said. There's our example. He acts with compassion. He binds wounds, restores health. He sees the flock is properly fed. He protects the flock from predators. And in over 5 decades of ministry, I quietly say predators within and without. You think about it, leaders have arisen in the church in Ephesus in the book of Ephesians, And someone who has the church directory can do damage to a church that an outsider can't do. And once that starts, shepherds have to step in and immediately take care of that. The longer you wait, the more casualties there's going to be. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Shepherds are involved, the feeding, the protecting, but they're to protect us from predators inside and out. They look after those who have strayed, and he recognizes he's doing the work of God and is accountable to God for his oversight. My last comment, and we'll get wrung out here, but just this will go quick. We were with Eastside in all 41 years. In the last 15 years, the older elders came to Chuck White and I and said, before the next group of guys are old enough to be elders, we're going to be too old. And so for the last 15 years, then I was also one of the elders of the church there. And looking at this on both sides, and people says, how did that work? And I says, oh, it's really easy. Something would come up, and I'd tell the elders, I'm taking off my elder's hat, and I'm putting on my preacher's hat, and you tell me what to do, and that's what we're going to do. So there's times I was not the elder and submitted, and 3 times in an elders meeting, Ron Canifex said, this is going to get really sticky, this is going to be ugly, we don't want you to have anything to do with this, we want you to preach. And I says, oh, I'm so grieved. I'm really hurt that you guys are leaving me out. And so we worked together to help look after and to shepherd and do that. None of us have any idea of the burdens that shepherds carry. We come to services, the lights are on, lessons are given, and I just want to encourage us, please regularly pray for our shepherds, and as we have opportunity, encourage them and their wives for what they do. All kinds of things go on, both at this building and all hours of the day and night, that our shepherds are involved with that no one else knows. We had a young couple, I'd gone to OC with them, and apparently he had told her we're never going to have kids. Well, she became pregnant, and they're both Christians, and the night that she told him she was pregnant, he went out and slept with someone else. So they went and met with the elders, and the elders prayed with them and worked with them. They did everything they could. Their wives didn't know. So the elders just, for 6 or 7 months, prayed with them regularly, did everything. The day she went to the hospital to deliver the child, a U-Haul trailer truck moved up to their house, and all of his stuff was moved out. Ladies, can you imagine coming home from the hospital with a newborn baby, and your husband has moved all of his stuff out? He didn't take any of her stuff. But he just, while she's in the hospital, then he left. She comes forward, we pray for her, and then about 2 or 3 months later, she came to the elders and she said, I just cry every time I come into this building. I so appreciate what you've done. I'm going to have to place membership somewhere else, so hopefully I can start worshiping and not cry. And so she left. Here's my question. Did the elders shepherd that family? Yes. They gave every opportunity for that young family to survive. They didn't, but that's not the elders' call. The elders did everything that they could, and I'd like for us just to be very constant in both our appreciation and sharing. Last word. Bob Pope was probably an elder 30 to 40 years, and describe Bob Pope.
Signed my Bible when I graduated.
Yeah, signed it by Bob Pope. Was just real straightforward, not a lot of emotion. He was in the office and he had opened a letter and he started crying, which I'm just thinking, oh, did someone die or something? And one of our missionaries from Australia had written to Bob Pope and thanked him for being an elder in the church and supporting them. And as Bob wiped a tear out of his eye, he said, I've been an elder 20 years. And this is the first time someone has said, thank you for me being an elder in 20 years. I just thought, okay, that's not going to happen again. So here's a text warning about the bad shepherds, the false shepherds. The inverse is, this is the responsibility, the burden, 1, of our shepherds, but 2, encourage us every time we can laugh with those who laugh, weep with those who weep, and reach out and serve and help our brothers and sisters in the body we too can be a part of the shepherding, so that in the same way that the Lord is my shepherd, then we can take the blessings we've received that and extend that to other people. God bless. Thanks for your time.